What's up, YouTube? This is the Action Figure Grader, also known as John, coming back to you with another video. And I thought today I'd do a video on a question that I received a lot recently from a lot of people. And by a lot of people, I mean basically my friends who think I'm a loser for caring about any of this stuff. But nevertheless, that's a different story. I wanted to talk to you about the uncirculated grade for action figures and what that means. And a lot of you may not know what uncirculated means, so this video will be a kind of a tutorial on some of the different figures that qualify for the uncirculated designation for action figures, and also the controversy surrounding uncirculated figures. There's a lot of collectors that are up in arms about the uncirculated grade and what that means for figures, and we'll go through that as well. So what does uncirculated mean? Well, in front of you I have four different figures that are all a little bit different, that are all uncirculated, and that's what that U stands for in the uncirculated grade here. As you can see, both of these figures are also uncirculated. And uncirculated means that basically there's two ways. There's figures that have been never been touched by human hands, but are vintage figures, such as these right here. They've been removed directly from the original retail packaging. Or they are modern figures, such as this Imperial Death Trooper, that were opened from a factory sealed case of multiple figures, direct from the manufacturer, and then sent in for grading. And so we'll start with the easiest cases of uncirculated and move our way down, and then we'll get into what exactly the controversy is surrounding the uncirculated grade. So first we have, as I mentioned, we have a Star Wars Black Series 2016 Imperial Death Trooper. This is still in its retail packaging. It received a 9.5 grade, and as you can see, it's uncirculated. So what that means is that whoever sent this in originally to the grading company sent in a box, usually a box of 12, of figures that were still in a carton that was unsealed, and they had the grading company remove all 12 figures, or however many came in the box, and had them grade each one of them. And so this was one of the 12. And because it was still in a factory sealed carton, it qualified for the uncirculated grade. And you know, nobody really has a problem, I would think, with doing this, because these are still factory sealed. They're modern figures. You can get these anywhere that Black Series figures are sold, and you know, that's a pretty common thing to see with modern figures. People sending in, you know, cases of these still sealed products, still in the factory condition. So that's one example. The next example would be what's called a mail-away figure, and in front of you, this is the 1983 Clipper Star Wars Darth Vader, and this was available and made in Amsterdam. And in order to qualify for uncirculated, as this one does, someone sent in this original white container that was still factory sealed with the figure inside, and to the grading company. And the grading company then removed it from this packaging and placed it next to it for the grading process. So this is another example. I have several mail-away type figures that are like this, that are all uncirculated, since they were sent in still sealed inside the original mailer box. And some people actually still only grade mail-away figures in this box. They don't actually display the figure next to it, which I have no idea why you would want to have a graded white box without taking the figure out for showing it. I mean, that's just the most exciting thing I've ever seen on a collection shelf, is just looking at a white box that says Star Wars Darth Vader. Oh my goodness, that would just be incredible. But in all seriousness, this to me is how you handle mail-away figures, especially vintage figures, where you know, they were still sealed, and it presents a lot nicer. You know, it's still sealed in the factory baggie. It came in this box originally. It is kind of cool that it shows that it was made in Amsterdam. This is called a Clipper box. There were many Star Wars figures that were made in Amsterdam, and they're all kind of known as Dutch Clipper products. But this is an example of one, and it received a U85 grade, and you know, it's a nice presentation. So that's another example, and again, I don't think anybody has problems with this type of uncirculated designation. But then we start veering into figures where a lot of collectors are starting to argue, and both of these have received the uncirculated designation. First, we have Bib Fortuna, which received a U85 grade, and then we also have a brown-haired Luke Skywalker, dark brown-haired, and he's also a U85 figure. And in order to qualify as uncirculated for vintage figures like this, where they're loose and graded, someone sent in these figures still in the original factory packaging that has the Star Wars label, the labels that we know and love, but then had the grading company remove them from that packaging and place them in a loose container for grading. And the reason that I think a lot of collectors are angry about that is because it is taking away from the remaining limited supply of figures that are available still on the factory card. By doing this, those cards are then discarded or resold for pennies on the dollar. And you know, from my perspective, I can understand why people are angry about that, because there certainly are collectors out there that do not have the funds to collect mint-on-card figures that are in really good shape, and they don't mind the fact that the card may have a lot of damage, and are willing to pay, you know, excuse me, I had to cough there. I forgot my water. But are willing to pay, you know, less of amount to have it still carded, and it may not look as pretty because of all the folds and dings and everything, but they would rather have that rather than, you know, a loose figure like this. And I have to admit, I'm guilty of that. You know, as I mentioned in another video, I am sending in this 1995 Boba Fett Power of the Force figure that I purchased when I was in high school in 1995, and it sat in my closet at my mother's house for 20-some years. And as you can see, the card is all dinged up. There's a lot of damage to this card. You know, luckily this is a fairly inexpensive figure to buy, even in good condition. But I plan on sending this in to AFA, the Action Figure Authority, for grading, and I'm going to have them grade this loose. So when I send this in, I'm going to send it in just as you see here. I'm going to put a note in there asking them to grade it loose. AFA is then going to take Boba Fett off of this card and put it in a container such as this and grade it as uncirculated. And to me, that's the highest and the best use for this product right now, because this factory card is in terrible condition. This is a fairly common figure, although there are variations. As you can see here, this has the half circle variation on his hand, on one hand, and then on the other hand he also has the half circle variation. But I've done enough research to realize this is probably at most a $50 figure. Other variations can go as high as $700. But to me, the highest and best use of this figure is to put it in a loose container, have it graded U85, hopefully, or whatever the number that the grading company comes back with. It'll most likely get a U85 or a U90 grade, given that it's pretty much in pristine condition. But there's some people that will complain about this and saying, "Hey, why don't you just grade it like this and leave it as is?" You know, there's collectors out here that would love to have this figure in the current condition. Well, you know, and this goes back to the argument of, you know, do you take figures off the card or not? And in my opinion, it is the right of whatever the collector wants to do. But you know, there's a lot of advantages, I think, to the U grade. You know, authenticity. By purchasing something like this, we know that the figure is authentic and not some kind of knockoff or bootleg figure, and or a recarded figure. You know, if this was a genuine figure but recarded on a fake retail packaging, it would go for a significantly amount of money if no one knew the difference. But because it's been graded already, people know that it's real. People know that it's authentic. They're not buying a knockoff or a bootleg. And that's happened to me in the past. I've actually purchased a couple of G.I. Joes that were international Chinese backed international heroes versions of like Storm Shadow, and I thought I was purchasing an original authentic product, and it was not graded. And once I purchased it, I sent it into the grading company, and they said, sorry, we cannot grade that because that is a knockoff figure. Well, that was a bummer to hear that, but this is what the grading company does. They authenticate these products, and they make sure that they're actually genuine vintage figures. And to me, that's the advantage of getting figures graded. That that allows me, the purchaser, to know that what I'm buying is real. Oftentimes, these figures have not been kept on the original card, but they have been kept in the original bubble. And what I mean by that, the bubble is this square that holds the figure in, and people will cut the card that's damaged and just keep it in the factory bubble, but the card has been completely mangled. I think in that case, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and grade it as uncirculated because the card has been damaged anyway. I don't think anyone's complaining about that, but that's what's called a cut card. And a cut card instance is a perfect example of when to do an uncirculated grade, as is this, in my opinion, a fairly common figure that has got heavy damage to the card. Cracked blisters and bubbles are another reason why I would want to get a U grade such as this. This bubble is over 23 years old. Luckily, it was sitting in my mom's house in a dark closet, so it did not receive any sun damage. But there are a lot of people that have a lot of vintage Star Wars figures that have been kept in a 100-degree attic for the last 20 years. And what happens over time is these bubbles crack. At that point, the value of having the figure still mint on card is minimal, because of cracks in the bubble, especially if the crack is large enough to pull the figure out. The grading companies will not accept the figure as mint on card. They will only accept it for loose designation. So again, in that instance, I think it does make sense to have the U grade. Well, what are the disadvantages of it? As I mentioned, taking a figure off of a heavily damaged card does remove the limited supply of remaining vintage figures that are still available. And I've seen pictures of dozens and dozens of cards that are in fairly decent shape that probably should have been graded as mint on card rather than loose like this. But because there are some collectors, or I should say businessmen, who can hopefully gather or garner a premium dollar value by having an uncirculated grade on some of these figures, they'll take them off of a minor damaged card and make them uncirculated, hoping to get big profits. Well, the only problem is that in this case, this received a U85 near mint grade, but I've seen many cases where the grade has come back as U75 or U80, which is a much lower grade. And as I mentioned in other videos, something that is a U75 or a U80 grade versus a U85 grade, the price difference that you get on the resale market is significant. To go from a U75 to a U85, it's at least 3 or 4 times the dollar value. And you don't know what that grade is going to be until you send it in. So a lot of these collectors are sending in figures that they hope to get a U85 on, and it unfortunately comes back as a U75. Well, they probably would have been better off leaving it on the card because they probably would have got the same dollar value on the resale market or higher. And again, this is another example. As I talked about the Bib Fortuna, this is a very common figure, and it received a U85. Unless this was a heavy damaged card or a cracked blister or a cut card, it makes 0 sense to make a uncirculated graded Bib Fortuna, because having one still mint on card, even if the card has some damage to it, you're going to get way more money for it on the resale market. So if that was the case for this figure, which I have no idea of knowing, it was obviously a mistake. And there are a lot of collectors out there who refuse to buy U-graded figures at all, just because they are taking a stand and protesting the uncirculated designation. So that's kind of the controversy in a nutshell. And Action Figure Authority recently, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, they did put out a poll to their members saying, should we get rid of the uncirculated designation for vintage figures? So clearly enough, collectors have protested to them that they have been polling members as to whether they should get rid of it or not. And AFA and UKG, which is based in England, as I mentioned before, are the two that do provide uncirculated designation for vintage figures. CAS, Collectors Archive Services, does not do that. And if you send in a figure such as this Boba Fett, still mint in the package, and say, hey, I want you to open it and grade it as uncirculated, they will refuse to do that. You can either grade it as like this, or you have to open it yourself and send it back to them. And I found that out the hard way with a few vintage convention exclusive G.I. Joes that were still sealed in a baggie. I sent them off to CAS, and they said, sorry, we can't take them out of the package. You're going to have to do that yourself. So they sent them back, and then I opened them myself, and then I sent them back to them. So, but they are, they're the only ones that grade vintage G.I. Joes. AFA and UKG do not do that. So I went ahead and did that. I have not received them back yet, which I'll share when I do get those. They're due back any day now. But I do think it's interesting that Collectors Archive Services, for whatever reason, has taken a stand and said we are not going to remove vintage figures from the packaging for the uncirculated grade. Only modern figures, such as the Death Trooper that I showed you earlier. But it's ultimately up to the collector to decide whether they want to get a figure graded this way or buy this way. And collectors are going to vote with their wallets. If the U-graded figures continue to command a premium versus non-U-graded figures, which in general they do, then this trend's probably it's not going to go away anytime soon, and it's going to be here to stay. If you are a collector and you are really against the uncirculated grade, then you'll just have to stay away from buying them. And collectors like me, where the U-grade, I particularly like the U-grade for figures such as this. I'm probably going to continue to buy them or submit them to grading companies, since I choose to collect that way. But whether you like or dislike the uncirculated designation can often come down to how you feel about grading in general. People that hate AFA graded figures will use the U grade as additional ammunition for their viewpoint on grading in general. There's a lot of people out there that think I'm an idiot for loving graded figures, and this is just more ammunition for them. So that's the controversy in a nutshell. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what questions you have regarding the uncirculated designation. But one last look at all these different figures that all qualify as uncirculated, but all in different ways. And I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks very much for watching.